The organizers are telling us that we are ready to continue. The streaming is live again. I'm really happy about it because of the technical problems that we have experienced. I would like to remind everyone that this is a roundtable on the foreign agent legislation and the enforcement of that law. So far, we haven't had any streaming, but the senior lawyer of Memorial, Dmitry Gurin, was telling us about the difficulties faced both by the Human Rights Center and the International Memorial. For those who have not heard his contribution, we would like Dmitry, within 5 minutes, just outline briefly the nature of the practices. Thank you, Olga. I shall try to sum up everything I've said so far. In fact, the problem is as follows. The International Memorial and the Human Rights Center Memorial both were designated foreign agents in 2014 and 16, and we are being disbanded, we are being dismantled in the laws of in the courts of law. This is the very first precedent in Russia of this kind, based on the so-called violations, alleged violations of the foreign agent legislation. We have 2 lawsuits from the Office of the Prosecutor General and from the Moscow prosecutor, one against the International Memorial in the Supreme Court, and the second one in the Moscow City Court against the Human Rights Center Memorial. What is it based on? What are they both based on? There are several episodes or cases or incidences of unbranded materials, our websites, information resources, first and foremost, and in one case, books, in a book fair, in the case of the International Memorial. So overall, both prosecutors quote 28 cases of administrative liability and 14 incidents of violating the requirements on labeling or branding as foreign agents. So both Yana Rachinsky and Alexander Cherkasov were actually, both charges were presented against them, and the International Memorial and also the Human Rights Center as foreign agents had to pay administrative fines over 60 million rubles in total of fines paid. So when you put all the charges together, the prosecution are saying that because of that, this implies the conclusion that these violations were systemic, not one-off, but systemic. What do they mean by systemic? They wanted to say this is a separate juridical issue. The prosecutor also points to the fact that the International Memorial and the Human Rights Center ignored deliberately the requirements of the legislation, because in 2013 or 15 they actually gave a very negative assessment of that law. And that's before the demands on labeling were in fact formed part of the legislation. They were not part of the legislation at the time. It is very strange that this deliberate nature has been deduced from the negative evaluation of the law given by the memorial. So if you criticize a law, it means that you already start or embark on a breach of law. And then the prosecutor also talks about a lot of materials which were not branded, but in fact it's only 8 resources, and yet he's not inducing any figures of how many materials were actually branded or labeled by International Memorial. Although in fact that shows, because the majority of the materials have been branded, have been labeled, it actually shows that there was no deliberate disregard of legislation. The further it goes about the argumentation, the arguments, which are going to be adduced in other cases as well, because this kind of behavior of International Memorial and Human Rights Center is deemed by the prosecutor is not just a breach of legislation, they also think that it is also a breach of the Convention on Human Rights, the Declaration on Human Rights, the Convention on the rights of a child, of children, although prosecutors should be aware that neither International Memorial nor the human rights are parties to those conventions, and they are not parties or subjects of international law. So this is unprofessional arguing on their side, on their part. Their main point is that by not labeling it or branding it as foreign agency, you're limiting rights of Russian citizens in terms of their access to information. And information is that an NGO or a non-profit organization, in fact, are a foreign agent. What other charges and claims do they put forward? Not putting on the websites reports on their activities, and the prosecutor forgets the fact that both organizations corrected any possible violations or breaches. Now it is a question of time. I'm really terribly sorry, but you have to stick to the time. So apart from that, prosecutors in their lawsuits also mentioned the requirements of that it should be commensurate, commensurability, which are implied in the European Convention and other conventions. They say that the disbandment or dissolution is going to be commensurate with the breaches. Why could they not use another measure rather than dismantlement or disbanding of the organization is not clear. And finally, Article 42 on NGOs or non-profit organizations. Under that article, they could have in fact stopped by their own resolution any activities of an NGO, having done in advance any requirement of them to remove or to correct any violations. It is not clear why they have not done. Perhaps they thought it would be very aggressive or there would be a lot of criticism against them. So as I remember, when they talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses, they did not use that tool. So Article 42 in its current version should not give such broad discretionary abilities to the law enforcement agencies to stop any activities without a decision of court or court decision. So this is about it. So I hope that when they wanted to recognize us or designate us as foreign agents, it did not put an end to our activities. Hopefully that this move to disband us or to dismantle us is not going to put an end to our activities either. Thank you, Dmitry. Colleagues, I suggest to that we leave all our questions to the latter part of our webinar after all those who want to take the floor have had the chance to do so. And now I would like to give the floor to Elena Pershakova, head of the legal practice for fundamental freedoms at the Public Verdict Foundation. Elena, the floor is yours. 5 to 6 minutes only. We cannot hear you. You have to open your mic. Can you hear me now? Yes. Apologies. I work in the Public Verdict Foundation. It is an organization who tries to defend citizens' rights and to minimize practices of violation of human rights by law enforcement agencies. Since 2012, we've embarked on protecting or defending the rights of activists and civic organizations because of the changes that were introduced in 2012, both in the law on non-profit organizations and public associations. So since 2021, we have been put on the register of foreign agents, so we are one of the oldest, together with Memorial and Gensavet Eco Defense, who have been put on the register mandatorily. We have had 2 planned checks by the law enforcement agencies and 5 attempts to have administrative prosecution of the organization. We have paid 400,000 rubles in fines. They have failed to accuse us twice for non-reporting. But then it turned out the Ministry of Justice did not, in fact, sort out their own territorial reporting, and all the reporting had been submitted. The other two cases were, in fact, repealed. But nevertheless, our director, Natalia, was in fact prosecuted twice for non-labeling our resources on the internet. We had two websites, and they talked about the YouTube channel website and also Vkontakte social media. 250,000 rubles fine and 100,000 ruble fine were charged to our organization. I think these are the largest sums charged to the director of the organization. I think the maximum allowed by the legislation is 300,000. What else? As far as the difficulties faced by our foundation, we had to cut some areas of our activities altogether, particularly working with local and other governments, because it's become impossible. But another difficulty is that we have problems with reporting. There are other difficulties, but I would also like to dwell on the issue of the fact that we are not just a foundation who is trying to defend itself, but since 2014, we've been trying to defend 35 organizations. 26 organizations were represented by us in court. One case is being heard at the moment, is active at the moment. On 20 cases where organizations were being prosecuted administratively, we managed to put an end to repeal 21 cases. So this shows that there are difficulties in defending organizations, NGOs, associations, and they are nothing to do with the deliberate nature of breaches. They have something to do with the fact that here we have some kind of commission from above, because a protocol is going to be issued. Usually an issued protocol ends up in a fine. For regional organizations, this often means disbandment. They are not waiting any further to be disbanded or dismantled by force. They self-disband. So 7 organizations we've been defending have self-disbanded, self-dissolved. Looking at the fines, I looked at the legal department statistics, and if you're talking about the growing number of fines and cases, I can say that in 2021, administrative charges were pressed against 68 individuals and officials. We're talking about 8,500,000 rubles of fines. Then we have 20 fined legal entities, officials, 11 officials, 8,900,000 rubles worth of fines. What does it tell us? It means that the government are not trying to increase the number of legal entities and officials being charged or fines, but they're using the same legal entities and officials who they fine repeatedly. And this has been proved by the experience of the International Memorial and the Human Rights Center Memorial. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that we can continue with our consultations, legal advice to media entities and also to individuals as well. So please come to us for help. Thank you, Yelena. This was very informative on fines faced by foreign agents or the so-called foreign agents. I'd like to give the floor to Dmitry, who is a media zone journalist. This is a media entity who have been designated as a foreign agent. You have 6 minutes. Good afternoon. I'm editor of Media Zona, which has been added to the register of media foreign agents. At the end of the first wave, broad wave, when almost all independent media of the federal level were added to that list. We were added to it as well. Many thought that the wave would come to an end after the elections. We were added to the list after the elections. So the practice shows this legal enforcement, legal practices of fines and other restrictions has not really been applied to us yet. But we think it's only a matter of time because all these protocols, which are being issued with some delay, because Roskomnadzor, the regulator, and the Ministry of Justice always have time to wait and see, and then to make to issue a whole list of protocols on the so-called breaches. First is that we don't understand the law itself, and the Ministry of Justice don't understand how it should be enforced. In fact, nobody, even its creators, have any idea of how it should operate. And this is part of the law itself. It was written in such a way that it could be interpreted anyhow, anyway. This goes for labeling, this goes for reporting, this concerns everything else. This is a minefield. You think that you're doing everything correctly, and there are no fines threatening you, or you're not risking any fines, and any moment you can get a letter or notification when they tell you that 100 to 150, 300 different messages you put on social media on a daily basis, they could choose one message and say that this is in breach of this legislation. So you have 350 messages per day. As you know that you follow a certain scenario when you do it. We don't know whether the scenario or this blueprint is correct. We might be committing 350 breaches or violations per day. We don't know. And the people who should be monitoring this legislation enforcement also are not clear as to what it means. So when they're going to manually issue charges or protocols, they will actually recognize certain things. They'll backdate their recognition or designation of breaches in reverse, because they don't know when these things are going to be coming into force. Secondly, as far as the media are concerned, what is happening to the media today who form part of the foreign agents list? There is no doubt that the audience of these media, judging by the surveys, are aware of the foreign agent status of the media, and they still trust these media. They still trust those publications. They don't lose faith in them. There are only single figures of those who agree with the designation of foreign agent. The rest of the people, the rest of the audiences understand full well what is taking place here.
What happens is that when this mass recognition of foreign agents started earlier this year in the spring, all of the media outlets must have realized that they have already been recognized as such, but all they need to do was to wait for the next Friday, because updates were published every Friday, and everybody already came to realize the fact that they would be recognized as foreign agents next thing you know, by next Friday. So these updates are published on a weekly basis on the site of the Department of Justice, and this puts a lot of pressure on us. And now we don't feel that much pressure right now in this kind of a tension, but still we need to, because we've done that. We've been there already. But I can see other colleagues shaking all the time before all these updates are published. The thing is that what happens is that it affects your way of doing business, because now if you like something, you want to retweet it or send it or forward it on or share it, but the last thing you want is to deal with a foreign agent, because really it takes a lot of effort actually to work your way all the way through those markings about foreign agents, and the lots of lots of text, and I understand that therefore this causes reluctance on the part of readers, and this results in estrangement of such media outlets recognized as foreign agents from the readership. This is the actually objective, as I understand, of all this practice, of all this legislative practice. And thank you, Dmitry. Why don't we move ahead and also listen to what Denis Shedov has to say, who is an analyst and lawyer of OVD of Public Verdict Info. Denis, go ahead and tell us what you are faced with as an organization, as a movement recognized as a foreign agent. My apologies again, ma'am, Special Rapporteur and colleagues, Human Rights Commissioner office. So very briefly, I would like to share what we do and what our organization does. So we provide assistance to victims of political persecutions when it comes to restrictions on freedom of associations. First of all, this is to do with public demonstrations when protesters are put in custody. On September 29th, the Minister of Justice included organization, public verdict in the list of unregistered organizations that perform the functions of foreign agents. We became the second of this on this new list after the Golos movement, Voice, which monitors elections, and also recently the Ministry of Justice included the Russian LGBT network on the same list. So we see a lot of pressure being put on public organizations and also LGBT networks. It took us 2 weeks to present all necessary documentations to the Minister of Justice, which was done on purpose by the Minister of Justice. And instead of publishing updates to the list on Friday, which is a normal pattern, so they included our organization to the list on a Wednesday, which actually made it impossible for us to comply with the deadlines of filing all the necessary documents. We keep filing lawsuits. We keep losing those cases, and courts continue to turn down our lawsuits. And some of our partners, in fact, universities, for example, whose students came to us for internships, they have minimized their cooperation with us following our registration as foreign agents, unfortunately. And we come to realize that this trend is going to be there for some time, is going to continue. Also, what happens is this week we are publishing a voluminous report on the negative effects effects of this legislation on organizations that are recognized as foreign agents. We're going to publish this report in Russian and English. We have managed to gather a number of cases, including like 158 indictments on the POs and their leaders. Same, special mention has been made of the two memorials, which is the Memorial International and the Memorial Human Rights Center memorials. So, because both organizations are now infrastructure-related organizations, they are part of they're cornerstones of civil society. They offer floors and premises for other organizations of civil society. They provide legal assistance and expertise to smaller projects. And so once liquidated, this is going to affect also our organization, which is OVD-Info, Public Verdict. For last year, Memorial and our organization have managed to file over 1,000 complaints with the European Court of Human Rights. Without the memorial, this would not have been possible had it not been for our cooperation with Memorial. So our legal assistance is very closely connected with the memorial organization. Also, at the same time, the public demand for changing the situation, abolishing the law, is very high. We also collect donations through the infrastructure of memorial as a cornerstone of this civil society organization. And once liquidated, this is going to cause a lot of damage to a large number of civil rights organizations and institutions associated with memorial. This is not about a memorial only, um, but about a large network of organizations that cooperate with it. At the same time, we believe that there's a lot of demand now in Russian society to have this situation changed. A couple of months ago, a petition was issued, and as of today, more than 250,000 people have signed this petition. Almost 250 Russian NGOs, media, and civil initiatives, they have supported this petition. So everybody share concern about this legislation. The moderator thanks Denis for his presentation, for your briefing, and maybe it might be a good idea to give the floor now to lawyer Valeria Vetoshkina, who was recognized as a foreign agent, as a lawyer, as a professional lawyer, as an individual. So why don't we listen to what she has to say, Valeria, about what issues she's faced with now as a foreign agent, as a lawyer for agent. Yes, I was right. Okay, so I was trying to put on this board. My name is Valeria. I'm a lawyer based in St. Petersburg. And on the 8th of November, 2 weeks ago, actually, I was, and my name was entered as in the register of foreign agents as a media outlet. My colleague Pavlov and myself, it looks like we had the record. So we were the first of the pioneers, and in terms of individuals having been put on this register now. So the trend is there, and as colleagues mentioned earlier today, that it's really hard to be recognized as a foreign agent, as an NGO, or as a media outlet. Now let's talk about what it looks like to be a lawyer recognized as a foreign agent. This is a new thing. This never happened before. This is kind of a legal nonsense. Doesn't make sense at all. What happens is that looks like this is a simple issue, but I fail to understand. I understand how a lawyer can be recognized as a media outlet. I'm not a media outlet, so I'm a professional lawyer, but at the same time, they treat me as a foreign agent, or am I a foreign media outlet? So I'm confused, honestly, and I'm subject to a number of restrictions that apply to media outlets, which I'm not by definition. And these restrictions, in fact, they do not affect myself only in person, no matter how I treat this law. No, I cannot even put any disclaimer on social media, right? What happens is that the fact that I have been recognized as a foreign agent, this is going to affect my trustees, my clients who trust their cases to me as a lawyer. So what happens is that on a quarterly basis, according to this law now, I'm required to include, to mark my post with this this vast disclaimer saying I'm a foreign agent or an individual, that whatever. So you know the language. So and really, it's really annoying and confusing and troublesome, and nobody can even get to the core of my comments working their way through this disclaimer. So also what happens is that being public, being able to comment on social media, this is one of the tools for defense. This is we rely on this. The European Court of Human Rights has stated many times that lawyers they are allowed to use the public appearances on social media as a remedy, as a means of protection, as a defense strategy. So I'm convinced of the fact that although I've not yet submitted any lawsuit with court, but I'm sure that the reason I was registered as a foreign agent by the Ministry of Justice was because I have been assisting somebody who the government doesn't like, maybe. So again, I'm being chastised. I'm being punished for my professional activity, which I think is discriminatory, unfair, and doesn't make sense. And in conclusion, I'm concerned that even so, now we're having two lawyers registered, but this is a bad message because it stigmatizes our profession and it causes a lot of stagnation. For the last 2 weeks, what I see that many lawyers have been pretty cautious in their in what they do and how they comment on our cases, and they also what happens is that many lawyers now think twice before being hired by a foreign client. They're very cautious now in actually promoting the profession, in doing what they're supposed to do. This kind of a stamp that you get as a foreign agent actually stigmatizes you, and it really undermines your professional practice. Thank you very much, Valeria. Why don't we go ahead with Olga now? Olga Medziva, she is a lawyer, the right legal initiative project. Thank you for inviting me. We have been dealing with issues Northern Caucasus now also. Have some joint projects with Memorial, and since 2015 we have been dealing with a lot of cases dealing with violence with regard to women and children. And our partner organizations recognize as foreign agents those who work in Northern Caucasus, and organization our case is going to be heard on the 25th of November at a different court. We're faced with the threat of being liquidated, and we threat of being liable criminally again as well. And unfortunately, we cannot hope to be successful in this information/disinformation warfare. And I agree with what Dmitry Treshanin said, that the quality of law is really leaves much to be desired, because nobody can clearly understand what this law actually wants us to do, due to its confusing language, indeed. And we understand the intent behind this law is to silence everybody who is not content, who is bold enough to speak out against the government on some cases. So, and if this trend continues, next thing we know, there's going to be no civil organization, no human rights organizations left in Russia whatsoever, zero. And not talking about legal persons, we now need to think about individuals now to actually ensure their physical protection, their physical safety. Also, let me mention that the European Court on Human Rights first received one of the lawsuits 8 years ago. Number of organizations submitted their lawsuit to the European Court of Human Rights, but unfortunately those cases have not been yet tried, and for the lack of assistance on the part of the European Court of Human Rights enables or makes it possible for Russian government actually to expand the language of the law to include more new, increasingly new categories into this law, and actually crack down on human rights organizations. So the issues that we have been faced with as an organization recognized as foreign agent is that not only just organizations are reluctant to cooperate with us, we have been difficulties hiring lawyers to protect our case. And honestly, so lawyers actually prefer not to deal with us and losing income rather than run running the risks of being actually also recognized as organizations associated with foreign agents. So our claimants are going to be actually affected. We have over 200 claimants whose cases we have been protecting so far, and it has to do with tortures and violence and so forth. So I don't know how, there's nothing we can make them happy about, and I don't know how we're going to work in the future. And the situation is really hard, and looking, if you read news, so we're at the brinkmanship of some new wars and armed conflicts. I'm not sure how. So the Russian government is going to, of course, dominate the Russian media information space, so to promote their interests. So, but nobody thinks about our job. Thank you, Olga, says the moderator. Colleagues, right, so I think that all of the speakers have already been able to speak. And why don't we give the floor now to other participants who have not prepared their speech. So why don't we go around the table and give the floor to all the colleagues to see what they have to say and what effects how they
how do you see your future unfold? Try to be brief. Literally, limit yourselves to 2 to 3 minutes so that we could leave the floor, the room for questions and answers, Q&A. Polina Filipova, Deputy Director of the Sakharov Center. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. In fact, it is almost impossible to add anything else to what has already been said. The Sakharov Center itself were put on the list in December 2014 at the end of the so-called first wave of foreign agents. Olga has already told us about the chronology of that legislation and how it was being enforced. It is also important to add that while the law existed, the Ministry of Justice could not add organizations at its own discretion. Not a single organization put their name on the list voluntarily. And I think it is very important to show that that was the mood of the civil society at the time and now. We see a lot of solidarity being shown, manifested among the civil society participants on that vis-à-vis the law on foreign agents, despite the fact that it has been construed in such a way, and the officials have also stated that, in order to divide the socially useful organizations, the so-called socially useful, and the organizations of a political nature. And the practice of enforcement demonstrates how there are more and more public expressions and activities are being branded as political. And at the same time, the government is not succeeding in turning this dysfunctional law operational. It's still the joke circulating in 2014. It was that it was a quality brand. It is a quality brand. If you're branded a foreign agent, you are a quality organization. It is a sign of quality, but it's not an internal joke any longer. When you meet people and you say, we are a foreign agent, they say, oh my God, respect, lots of respect. So the very issue of it strangely, oddly consolidating our civil society is true, but also something about our own situation. The first is the minimization of opportunities working with young people, first and foremost, particularly with school children and students. It's been reduced to a minimum because we have been forced to put an end to a lot of educational programs, a lot of outreach programs which involved school children. Although even then and now, we're mostly working with school children on biographies and on the biography and life of Andrei Andreevich Sakharov. Dmitry Dmitrievich Sakharov, sorry. So it is not a human rights type of project. It's just a history project, really, first and foremost. And secondly, over the past 7 years, there has been an increasing difficulty of working in the regions or with the regions. If before we could have a mission and into a particular region, leave Moscow, visit some organization regionally, run a project with them. Now it is very difficult to find partners in the regions. It is not the question of people refusing to work with us. There are regions where people sympathize with us. There are civic organizations who want to work with us, but unfortunately for them, it is too risky. They are being visited by law enforcers, security services, and therefore we cannot really put them at risk because we would leave and they would be left with those risks. So these are 2 points I wanted to make. Thanks, Polina. As far as I understand, this puts an end to our main part of the webinar, but before we started the transmission or streaming today, we'd also asked other organizations to share their experience, other organizations who form part of the list, who have been put on the register of the foreign agents. One of the witness statements, as it were, one of the experiences we would like to hear about today, because this is the group of non-profit organizations who have not been very visible, and yet they have been experiencing the same pressure. I am now talking about the indigenous peoples organizations. We have been sent a document pointing out that 3 human rights organizations of indigenous peoples have been designated as foreign agents. I'm not sure how the Batania Foundation, the center, the Information Center Yesavey, and the Center for the Help for Indigenous People, they have been designated foreign agents as foreign agents, and they disbanded, self-disbanded, because they could not comply with the fines that they were issued. They could not pay the fines. And also Stepan Petrov was also recognized or designated a foreign agent. Our opinion, another organization that has a consultative status, is now being charged by co-op article, which charges them for not including themselves in the register of foreign agents voluntarily. So if these charges are pressed, they could be criminally liable up to 5 years of imprisonment or 5 million rubles worth of fine administratively. So, colleagues, we would like to clarify if there are any questions to the participants of this round table today. First and foremost, perhaps the Special Rapporteur and other representatives taking part in the round table today. Do you have any questions?
Thank you all very, very much. It is a very distressing time for you all, and indeed you have lived with this for so long, and there's such uncertainty about what the law actually demands of you, and it just seems to be a way of neutralizing the work of human rights defenders in Russia. So I have some questions. So I'll just go to my notes here. So first of all, Elena, I think you were talking about the organizations that had self-dissolved. You mentioned 7 organizations had self-dissolved, and Olga mentioned then later on 3 of the indigenous organizations had also dissolved, in that case because of inability to pay fines. Altogether, do you know how many organizations have decided to dissolve, because clearly it makes it a much broader picture when you add them in? That would be the first question for Elena. And then this, Dimitri, you were talking about Dimitri, journalist Dimitri. You were talking about the Friday updates. And I'd like to hear a bit more about, if you don't mind, about is this going to be tied to a number, or is it just at the whim of the government, or how do you explain it, basically, if you can explain it? And then the report. Dennis, the report that you're about to publish this week, we'd love to have that. And I presume it will also include the legal framework and the way the legal framework has expanded and is being used. But maybe you could say something about that. The mandate has sent 13 communications to the Russian authorities concerning the foreign agent law. And these were specifically about foreign agent NGOs, but also the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression. She sent a communication about the law on foreign agent media when it was adopted, just so you know. And we are trying to follow it and do what we can. So I'm also particularly interested, maybe Olga, you could say more about this, or sorry, I have a question here. Valeria, the effect on women human rights defenders specifically, and LGBT defenders as well, are there additional challenges because of the fact that you are women, or do you know particularly of specific additional challenges that LGBT people face? And I'm also interested in you said, and of course the fact that people are tending to be very cautious and self-censor a bit because of it's so difficult. But Olga, you mentioned the split between, well, I think it was Olga. No, it was Paulina. Sorry, Paulina. You talked about the regions and how difficult it was, which gave me the sense that it's more risky in the regions. Maybe you could talk a bit about both, the difference between working, say, in Moscow and in the regions, and secondly, in terms of the foreign agent law, and secondly, the kind of you mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned this, but the difference between what's social work and what's considered political work, and as how the line blurs. But if you could give me some example of specifically, it would be good. What do those who've been designated as HRD foreign agents specifically work on? What rights? They would be my questions. Thank you very much.
Коллеги, если вы позволите, спасибо большое за эти вопросы.
Thank you for your questions, Mary. With your permission, I shall moderate. There are questions, 4 questions. The first one addressed to Elena. How many organizations self-disbanded or self-dismantled because they couldn't pay the fines? Elena, do you have the statistics? I'd say the following. To tell you how many organizations self-disbanded since 2015, 2016 would be very difficult in terms of exact figures. Perhaps Denise could add a little bit because as they have prepared a report, they have more specific information on that. But I can say approximately that based on our monitoring of the situation back in 2015 and 16, and what I can see unfolding today, if today Olga at the very beginning said 219 organizations being added to the register, as a rule, organizations are being removed from the register quite often, post-mortem, after they died, as it were. So I would say 1/3 of that figure. So we say 219, 1/3 of those organizations were disbanded. I might be mistaken. But in 2015 and 16, very often organizations were dismantled, were disbanded, not because there had already been issued any fines, but because they decided not to accept any foreign funding anymore, because they didn't want to be designated foreign agents and be branded as foreign agents. And there were lots of those organizations that stopped accepting foreign funding. And very briefly, the last question that you asked concerned the difference between non-profit organizations being designated foreign agents and organizations called socially oriented organizations by the government. It is an unequivocal discrimination, which is clearly seen over the past several days, because we are not talking about the federal legislation only, where we have a clear indication that socially oriented organization cannot be included in that register, socially oriented organizations, if they have been designated as foreign agents. So the recent case we're defending at the moment is the St. Petersburg charity, Humanitarian Actions, helping HIV patients. They have been put on the register of of socially oriented NGOs because they have a medical and pharmaceutical licenses. They are the organizations that should be deemed an exception from any political activities because they work in the area of health, public health. And nevertheless, we have appealed 3 actions of the prosecutor to include them, of the Ministry of Justice to include them in the list of foreign agents. And we've appealed it, and we'll see what the St. Petersburg City Court decides, because they have actually thrown out our appeals, the first 3 appeals. And also the administrative responsibilities, liabilities of non-inclusion of your own organization voluntarily in the list. The very first level of court has dismissed that case because they said that this organization acts in the area of public health and should be excluded from the rule or from the requirement that they are a political organization, irrespective of the fact whether they have foreign funding or not. So there should be an exception. At the moment, it's being maintained. Secondly, the question is addressed to Dmitry Trishanin. How can you explain what's happening on Fridays? Can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can. But very briefly, Dmitry. Let's not have any illusions that the Ministry of Justice identify the foreign agents, even using the vague criteria, which form part of the legislation and identify them suddenly and add them to the register on Fridays. No, obviously, the decisions are being made at the level of Ministry of Justice. They think, well, there is another independent media outlet that should be added to this list. They don't want to do it all on the same day to avoid any criticism of repression, and they kind of stretch it out bureaucratically. So they decide to do it on Friday evening because it's the end of the working week. Secondly, it is the time when the news gets least coverage. So it is an attempt to reduce the reaction and the protests, because if all those organizations were declared foreign agents on the same day in April or May, this would look monstrous. But now they did the same monstrous thing, but they have been stretching it out between April and now. And therefore, they were stretching out on Friday evenings where people don't read the news anymore. So this is just a gimmick. This is just a trick. And then we have several more questions. What is the effect of this law on women human rights defenders and also LGBTQ activists? I think it should be addressed to Olga Gnezdilova, or if other human rights activists also want to take the floor, this would be welcome. Thank you. Yes, if people want to add something, please do. We have been dealing with domestic violence, and we can see that both ourselves and our colleagues have been put on the register because we started talking about the law on domestic violence in Russia, which does not exist. We're the only country in the Council of Europe that doesn't have such a law. And we were the first organization to be put, one of the first organizations to be put on the register of foreign agents, because we're trying to undermine the patriarchal and hierarchical foundations of our regime. The first legal entity that, individual that was put on the register was Daria Pakhonchich. She was a feminist activist. She was punished for her feminist activities, and now she has to report on every project and product and everything she does, which doesn't only impede normal activities, but in fact, totally ruins her whole life.
Мы сталкивались с тем, что в маленьких городах, в маленьких селах люди настолько боятся этого ярлыка «иностранный агент», что они перестают разговаривать.
People are afraid of this label of a foreign agent, therefore they are reluctant to come to us to share their concerns. They stop picking up phones, and their children actually are now being victims of bullying in schools. So it looks like pretty smacks of 1937 under Stalin reprisals, actually. So, if I may, let me throw in a couple of thoughts about women human rights defenders' situation in my neck of the woods. You understand that Olga was right. Attitudes, traditions here are very patriarchal, old-fashioned, so to say. And if you are treated as a human rights defender, as a woman, you're treated as an addendum to a male professional, rather than you're deprived of. You're not believed to be a fully fledged professional by yourself, being a woman. This is the attitude that we're faced with on the part of such patriarchal patterns in society. Thank you very much. As a moderator, colleagues, another question goes to with regard to the difference in how organizations work in Moscow and out there in regions. So, Polina, maybe you can tell us something about how organizations, what the differences between working here in Moscow or elsewhere in. oftentimes what happens is that we offer the floor for regional partners, and of course we're subject to what we call an internal censorship, and Valeria, and right, I agree with what she, and concur with what she said, that everybody is afraid of running into threats, and same goes for regional authorities. Of course, people there out there in the regions, in the hinterland, they really they're told by regional authorities, hey, stop cooperating with this human rights organization, otherwise you're going to run into some problems. So there's a direct message that local authorities, local/regional authorities send out to our potential partners out there. So now I'd rather refrain from answering your question directly because I'm not an expert in this, but my gut feeling is that the situation is really, really bad, and especially in light of what Olga said, not many regional organizations have the possibility to actually collect the money they need to pay fines. A 200,000 ruble fine is going to be something that a small-scale regional or local organization will not be able to gather and to pay, actually. So such organizations actually are small in numbers, and for them to end up on this register for it just means that, hey, no civil life is going to happen there in this region. Is going to be put on hold, cease to exist. So there's no civil society whatsoever in such a region. Where Yelena is raising her hand, so she would like to ask a question or to add a comment. Yes, I would like to add a comment with regard to regional practices here, the way we work in regions. So, number one, organizations are selected by like Minister of Justice to be the most credible, the most powerful, the most influential organization in the region. And if this organization is recognized as a foreign agent, this means what? That kind of a pool of activities is going to be put on hold. And we're talking about not only about political activities, we're talking about protection of rights of children or environmental protection activities, nothing to do with political activities as defined by law, right? So on top of that, if such organizations are headed by a parliamentarian or a deputy of the so this chances are that such organizations will end up being liquidated, indeed, to send a message to the rest of similar organizations. And Polina was right when fines are issued and imposed. Organizations do not have enough funds to pay the fine, and it's easier for them to wind up and liquidate themselves rather than pay the fine. I'm not sure about maybe organizations seated in Moscow, St. Petersburg, but if you look at provincial organizations, wow, there's no way for them to be able to collect such funds, to be able to pay funds. Starting 15th of September, this new decree came into effect, in which made our life even tougher. And honestly, so the organizations don't even have any chance whatsoever to pay the tax, to pay the fine, or to present the reports as required by law. The moderator continues, yes, starting from in July this year, foreign agents are required to present a large number of reporting documents. So this list keeps growing all the time. So not only about their incomes and expenses, there's a lot of other. So Dmitry is also raising his hand. Yes, a very short remark, if I may, with regard to cooperation with, well, as on the part of a foreign agent with other organizations or other, I don't know, contractors or subcontractors. All right. As if we look at our operations, when we provide legal assistance to Russian citizens out there in Russian provinces, so we need to cooperate with local lawyers. We need to rely on local expertise, which now this is going to be very difficult. 100 times more difficult is going to be for us to interact with, to cooperate and agree with and cooperate with local lawyers for them to help us, because, you know, this, like, they see that we are a foreign agent, fine. So the last thing they want is to cooperate with us, and therefore we cannot effectively provide legal assistance to our clients out there in Russia's regions. So honestly, this makes our life much more difficult indeed. Thank you, Dmitry, says the moderator. Any more pending or lingering questions, comments? And anyway, while you're thinking, whatever has been said today and some additional materials that we have received during our preparations, everything is going to be analyzed, scrutinized, organized, and will be propagated amongst special rapporteurs and experts who are interested in helping us in dealing with this law on foreign agents. Mary, go ahead, please. You have a question, please.
Can I just say one more thing before, and then I have to go because I have another meeting. But has anyone ever been removed? I mean, apart from, you know, disbanding, has anyone ever been removed as a foreign agent, or is it a permanent thing? And then I heard somewhere that sometimes people are designated a foreign agent twice. So does that happen? And what does it mean in practice?
Коллеги, есть ли какие-то комментарии по этому вопросу? Были ли, соответственно, удаления из реестра? Кто-то был удален из реестра?
The moderator repeats your question. As of now, no, there's been no cases of removing, only in case of liquidation, so legal death, in other words. So no actual organization has ever been removed. Once there, stay there. Well, thank you very much for your participation, for your interest, for your time that we have been able to discuss our current issues related to the legislation of foreign agents. And like I said, we're going to put everything together and publish all these documents again. Thank you very much for your participation. Have a good one.
Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Спасибо, до свидания.
До свидания.
Спасибо, всего доброго.